Hello, my name's Niranjan, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast. Learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. Today is episode number 2, where we will be talking to Dianne Whelan and learn how she developed the mastery of seeking wisdom as her craft. Dianne Whelan is an award-winning Canadian filmmaker, photographer, author, and adventurer and wisdom seeker. For the past 5 years, Dianne has been hiking, paddling, snowshoeing, and filming her journey on the longest trail in the world. Her other journeys were captured through film, books, in the high Arctic and Mount Everest. Dianne's films, books, and multimedia projects are based on adventures and the blending of traditional wisdom and the modern cultures. Hello and welcome, Dianne.
Hi, thank you. Nice to be with you today.
Thank you for being available to be able to share your story of wisdom seeking and the big adventure that you have embarked on over the last 5 years.
Thank you.
I'm honored to have you, to be able to speak to you so candidly and openly about your experience. What do you believe about yourself on this journey and what you've learned, and does it define you?
The question a little bit reflects on a bit about what is my essence, and that's what I sort of bring to the journey. And I've always had a very strong connection to the earth and nature. I love adventure. I love exploration of the natural world. And I've also had sort of a strong rebellious streak against oppression and injustice and unfairness. And as you grow older, that rebellion, you try to learn grace, that rebellion. And therefore, the power of storytelling, because you could sort of, through films or books or even narrative images, I could explore the things that mattered to me and do it with some grace and still make a point. Even as a young girl, growing up in the 1960s and 70s, I wanted to play hockey, but girls weren't allowed to play hockey. And I wanted, women couldn't be police officers, we couldn't be firemen. By the time I was 5, I kind of knew that there was an injustice based on gender. And as I've grown up, I've seen that injustice can also be based on culture, race, sexual identity. And so I've always had a really sort of a consciousness around that and wanting to know what my purpose could be. I'm putting a ripple that could bring about change in a positive, non-destructive way. These ideas permeate all aspects of my life, including the spiritual realm. I grew up in a Catholic home, but I never found meaning in the churches and synagogues and liturgy. For me, the idea that women were made from the rib of a man was offensive and biologically inaccurate, because we, of course, are all from our mother's wombs. So these ideas have matured in me into very passionate convictions about the need for spiritual equality. And what I've learned by spending so many years in nature, I really believe that the connection between the violence to women in the world and our relationships is very connected to the relationship that we have to the earth. Because before there was a Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, there was a maiden mother crone, and the earth was our mother. And that is a very ancient idea that still lingers deep in our cellular memory somewhere. When you spend a long time in nature, that is one of the things that wakes up in you, is this real reconnection to all things. We're part of a web. We're not here to conquer, to live with. Live with the animals, live with the mammals, live with the birds, live with the trees. Like that we're all part of one living ecology, right?
Yes.
All of these ideas define me, for sure, and define my work.
It's a beautiful and very in-depth response to who you are and the connection of how we come about to be and do what we do. How did you end up finding your connection with being in wild and really connecting with Mother Earth, with the nature element versus doing a regular 9 to 5 job? Or what was it that sparked that transition? Was it a transition at all, if that?
I think we tend to think of life as a line. We see how time is measured when they talk about epochs or whatever as a line. But in fact, life is a circle. And that, again, as women, what we can bring to the understanding of cosmology in life is that it is a circle. So as a small child, I grew up in the rainforest of British Columbia, and my first teachers were frogs and tadpoles. I used to go and get the tadpole eggs when they were little black spots still in this clear gelatinous gel. And I would bring them back to my homemade pond, and I would watch these tadpoles get born, and then how they would evolve into small frogs with tails, and then a frog that would jump out of the water and now live in land water. And that is where my sense of spirit was born. And that's why I would then go to church on weekends with my parents and go, I loved that we shared this as a family, but I couldn't find meaning. Mother Nature had already seized my soul as a 5-year-old.
Right.
And these frogs and tadpoles were teaching me something in a way that being in a building with religious iconographic sort of symbols wasn't art. And I say this with all due respect to all people of all religion. I can only speak to my own truth as a woman trying to find and connect to that part of who I am. That was me as a 5-year-old. And then I went through 12 years of our education system, and by the time I was 18 or 19, I was starting to think more. I was more influenced, like, well, I need to make money. To this and that. And so I went and got an undergraduate degree and started working in marketing for my family, who owned their own company. And I thought I'd get some business experience. And in those couple of years, I bought a house, a car, and the bank owned them. But, I started that process of buying things that we do. I realized I was gay. Very frightening. I always laugh when people talk about coming out of the closet because it's like, it sort of makes it sound like it all happens in 5 seconds. It was a self-awareness that took years to happen. By the time I was in my early 20s, I had ventured into my first relationship with a woman. Because my parents are Catholic, it did not go down well, and I lost my job, and I lost my family for quite a few years. We've since healed, and everything is wonderful. Time is a great healer. Especially when we all embark on our own healing journeys.
Yes.
At the time, I suddenly found myself in a position where I was like, okay, now what, right? I just lost my job. I just lost my family. I'm in my early 20s. And I decided to give up everything. I let go of all my material possessions. I bought a tent and some panniers for my mountain bike, and I went off into the Baja of California, camping and sleeping on beaches, and thought hard about the life that I wanted to live. As much as I mourned the loss of something, I also saw it as a great opportunity to really connect, rebuild the house from the bottom up, like look at my foundation, who I am and what I want to do. You think about the things that you do that you enjoy and that bring you great joy. And I've always loved the outdoors. I'd always loved writing. I'd always loved photography. And so I started exploring ways that I could blend the things that I enjoyed the most. What would become of that? And I really minimized. Like, I lived very frugally. I took economic pressure off. I always say to people, we all are willing to suffer. We all want love. We all want money. We all want these things. That tells you very little about who a person is. But when you look at what each individual is willing to suffer for, that is very revealing of who they are. And I was willing to suffer in order to live a life that felt very authentic to myself. And the thought of a 9-to-5 job, as much as so many people love it, wasn't fitting me. I think I would have had to be on antidepressants or something in order to acquiesce to that kind of life, because the greatest gift we're given is our life. Whether you're getting paid $20 an hour or $1,000 an hour, you are exchanging your life in that barter.
Yeah.
And, 40 hours, 50 hours a week is a lot of your life. And I'm not saying that it's not important to work. And of course, there's a very pragmatic, we need to survive element to it. But I think there's more to it than that, obviously. We all feel that. Finding your purpose can be very overwhelming for people, almost too pragmatic, I think, sometimes. And in any case, for myself, after that happened and I lost my job and I had to really reconnect, I also thought about the people that I really respected in my life. And I suddenly realized that most of them are artists. That was also very revealing. So I embarked on a different path at that point. I was in my mid-20s and I went back to school again. I went to journalism school and ended up getting a job as a photojournalist. And then from there, I evolved that into documentary filmmaking. It's always been storytelling. It's gone from the written word and the photograph to moving images. And now what I do for a living is really a combination of all these things. It took a long time, but by following my heart, I reached a place where I had a synthesis between being able to be in the outdoors, my love of story, my love of photography, and filmmaking. The documentary genre, and every time I make a documentary, I also write a book. So I've managed, my work is my life, and my life is my work. There isn't a division. Mm-hmm. And I've been able to be self-employed. Even now, to go on this journey for 5 years, I had to rent out my home. I sold my car. I got rid of my monthly bills. And again, I was willing to suffer to make this. For me, it's not suffering. Being able to sleep in my tent out in the wild and go on 4,000-kilometer paddle up to the Arctic, it's amazing. I love it. So it's not really suffering. But for some people, to give up all those things can be perceived that way. And I think that's another thing to remember when we say we are what we're willing to suffer for. If it's what you believe in, it'll never actually feel like suffering. Right. It might be perceived as such, but it won't to you because you're living your authentic self. Mm-hmm. And people are like, well, how do you know? How do you know it's your authentic self? And I just say, just close your eyes and tap into what you're feeling in your belly. If what you feel inside feels calm and you have a sense of peace, then you're on the right path. Feel like there's constriction and there's something stuck in your throat, then perhaps you're not quite on the right path yet. Our body has a way of letting us know we're on the right path or not.
Absolutely.
For yourself.
Absolutely. It's just another connection to Earth, our physical bodies, of how we translate that message just as nature does. A bold move, be so courageous and really reset yourself at the age of early 20s and really figure out what is working for you and what isn't working for you. It's a bold move for you. But I guess one that was most crucial in defining what you want your life to look like, which again I think is very telling to the type of person you are, because I'm sure there are many 20-something years old out there who would never even thought that they have that kind of control, that it's just been positioned on them.
People always laugh and say, I did my undergraduate degree in philosophy. I studied the history of ideas, basically. I went to McGill University for my first undergraduate degree, and I studied philosophy, and my electives were like in religious studies and art history, but really I was fascinated by the history of ideas. And then after 4 years, I realized, wow, it is the history. It's his story of the ideas. And what, as a woman, can we bring to her story? What is her story? Because all these great thinkers I was reading were all men. And I didn't even realize it for several years because, well, that's just the way it is. People would always laugh, right? You'd be like, oh, I'm studying philosophy. And people are like, oh, what are you going to do with that? But actually, it's informed everything because as soon as you start contemplating, really the history of ideas is about, and the history of ideas is really about people stopping and asking themselves, why? Why am I here? Why are we here? So I'd already had a discourse with that. I'd already been reading and engaged in that kind of conversation with myself for several years. And that's the beauty of a liberal arts education. And I think it's something that we're forgetting about right now in our culture. And that is, all education is not just about getting a job. It's about the development of self. Because whatever you do becomes a part of who you are. And it doesn't matter if I bankrupt or I become a millionaire. I'm always carrying whatever knowledge that I've given myself an opportunity to sit with and learn. That's always a part of you. No one can take that away. Yes. And it also frames your worldview, right? It frames the way you look at the world. Part of the reason I was able to sort of sit back and reflect in my early 20s was because I had just spent those years prior to working for my family for a few years engaged in that kind of personal discourse.
It's so interesting how you've positioned it, and I love the way you said it is a development of self on a much deeper level rather than the mental mind for an external value, but developing yourself for an internal value. Also seeing other elements of what we're part of, the earth, nature as our lessons and as our teachers, because I'm sure through the documentaries and the capturing on your books and all the wonderful things that you've produced from your journey have offered an insights about you and others.
I've always been intrigued by traditional knowledge. When I say traditional knowledge, I mean Indigenous, but also it can also be non-Indigenous. In fact, it's just people who have land-based education. I have 8 years of university education, and I can remember in the early stages of this 5-year journey I'm on now, which is called 500 Days in the Wild, but it's actually 5 years. When I found myself, I spent 1 week with Ojibwe elders in ceremony. I was paddling Lake Superior, and I camped for the night, and I heard a distant drumming. So the next morning, I ventured up the trail, and I found about 30 Ojibwe elders setting up teepee and a sweat lodge. And I thought, this would be great for the film. I wonder if they'd let me interview them for a few hours. And I went over to them, kind of very frightened, but I went over to them and I said, hey, explained to them what I was doing. And one of the elders said to me, just go over there and sit down. We're going to finish what we're doing, and then once we're set up, we'll call you over. So I went and I sat for several hours, quietly waiting. Then I was eventually called over, and all the elders were sitting in a circle on chairs just outside the teepee, and they asked me to sit down, and my heart was thumping, and I could feel my blood racing, and I knew that I was going to be, I felt like I hope I don't say the wrong thing.
Right.
I sat down on this chair, and the elder, his name was Rodney, looked at me and he said, why are you on this journey? And it was a long silence, and then I said, well, because the world stopped making sense to me. He replied, and he just, another few moments of silence. And then he said, why are you here? And I said, well, because I'm following my heart. And then they said, okay, up your tent, you're spending the week with us. It was an amazing experience, and I was able to learn song and sit in the teepee and learn some of the traditional ways of their connection to the land. I find that we're living in this, science and technology are amazing. I'm not going to say they're not. I'm talking to you on a cell phone, right? Obviously, it's not all evil and bad. The problem with it is, I'm not sure that there's any wisdom that's actually guiding it. Just because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean we should. We've learned that through the development of nuclear. We have nuclear energy, but we also have bombs that can kill millions of people with their bombs. And so just because you have the technology doesn't mean, what's guiding this? And so I've always been intrigued by finding stories where science and technology interface and work with traditional knowledge. And that you have people who have university educations and people who have land-based education. And I think that the two of them need to work together. Anyway, one of the things I learned in that week that I was with them is they kept looking at me in the morning prayer in the teepee and saying, you're too much in your mind. You're too much in your mind. Get to your heart, Speak from your heart. Go to your heart. And it made me realize that that's part of what happens when we start reading. It's all... you're receiving information, you're reading books, you're not, I think education is great, but it can just put you too much in your mind. And the mind should work for the heart shouldn't work for the mind. And finding purpose is very much about that understanding. You're not going to find your purpose in your mind. You're going to find your purpose in your heart, and then you put your mind to work to help you manifest that. Take that seed and grow it into a large tree. Right? Yes. That was sort of one of the big reveals for me on the journey, is that realization that we are too much in our mind, and that to find purpose, we do need to tap back to our heart. And I guess that's what I meant earlier too when I said that feeling in your gut, right? Because when you start tapping into your heart, it's feeling. Not cerebral. You're connecting to a feeling.
Yes, absolutely. It's about having that deeper connection. Unless we tap into our physical bodies, then we can make the mental connection as to what our physical bodies are telling us. From what you're saying, the mental stimulation that we receive from books and films and education and all those things that are very prevalent in our world can often keep us locked there, but still very separate from our own bodies. And I know you expressed earlier that how our bodies will let us know. The physical body will always tell you where you're at. What is your baseline? What's that? Are you in equilibrium or not? What does that look like for you? Throughout this journey, you have shared and you've always referenced come back to your own heart spaces too, following it, listening to it, being in tune with it. What has it taught you so far?
A few things. One is, when I left, I very much wanted to be like that artist dropping out of society, right? Like, it was like, I wanted that time away to reflect on who I was. It was another one of these, I needed to make another film. I was looking for something to do for my next project, I thought, but I also knew that I was at a time in my life where I needed to check out to check in with me. I'd gone through a lot of changes after coming back from Everest. That was sort of the inspiration to go on this journey. One of the great lessons I learned while I've been out, and again, this comes from an Indigenous cosmology, it was spending time with an elder in Saskatchewan at Standing Buffalo First Nation. One of the things that I learned in hanging out with them was, in Western culture, we romanticize the individual. The idea of individualism, like being able to stand on your own 2 feet and sort of find your way in the world. And as an artist, I enjoy my time alone to create. I think I had fallen out of balance with that. In Indigenous cultures, they do not define poverty by money or assets. They define poverty by how alone you are. In an Indigenous perspective, me being alone out in the wild, they perceived a very impoverished person, which I thought was really interesting.
Yes.
And there was also some truth to it. We have to find that balance between giving ourselves the time that we do need to be alone. I think being alone in meditation, being alone in nature, these are very important moments in our day that really ground us into who we are, so we don't get swept up into the swirling vortex of everything else that might be happening around you. You need to always find your grounding. At the same time, the need for community, the need for kinship, the need for love. That was one of the lessons for me, was just that, in fact, this romanticization of the individual is actually a kind of a sickness in our culture. And I think it's one of the reasons why we have so much anxiety and depression, is this feeling of disconnect that people are having. Now we put our elders in old age homes. That never used to be, right? I mean, your elders were in your house helping you, were your grandparents. They were helping raise the children. Like, we existed more communally. Yes. And now that's fragmented. And even though we're living in cities of millions instead of villages of hundreds, people have never been more alone. Certainly when you study the history of Western thought, so much of it is all about the individual. The need of the individual individual freedom. We all want that. We do want the freedom to be who we are. Balancing that with the need for community and kinship. That was one of the big lessons for me there. Another one was just about this idea of 7 generations, not just thinking when we make a decision, always thinking about the impact of that decision on the next 7 generations. And you can imagine how different our corporate world might be if they had to be guided by that wisdom in the decisions that they made. You wouldn't be able to put up a pulp mill on a river to create jobs for 500 people for 50 years and then destroy a source of fresh water, a food source for people for another 5,000 years. Like, you just wouldn't be able to do that.
Yes.
You could still do it. And I mean, if industry was motivated with that responsibility, hey, we can put a car on Mars, we can put the rover on Mars. We can certainly find a way to do whatever it is that we're called upon to do, but we can do it with that kind of responsibility to the future, to the unborn, just as those who came before us have done for us. The things that I've learned about a different way of looking at reality. I come from settler descent. I'm very much imbued with Western culture and Western philosophy, and as I've been on this journey and reconnecting to the land, a lot of the knowledge I've gained has been through spending time with elders in different communities and them sharing with me wisdom that is thousands of years old and that has guided us for a long time until the circle is broken. We're only ever thinking in a line. That just puts you very different. It's like I always say, there's a big difference between your public speaking. I'm always finding, I'm speaking to the front, and everybody's receiving that information in front of me. When I'm on this journey and I'm collaborating with Indigenous artists and elders and filming, we always begin this process in a circle. And in a circle, everybody is equal.
Yes.
You don't have that I'm in front and you're out there thing. In a circle, everybody's the same way. Everybody's voice is just as strong. But process, I guess, is what I'm learning about too. Not just these ideas, but the process by which, how we do what we do. Most of the things I've learned from other people. I'm not saying, there have been times where I've been alone out there for months. I haven't seen anybody. For sure, those moments of solitude have revealed to me things about myself, things that a mirror could not have.
Yeah.
Getting over the fear and the apprehension and getting to a place of feeling really calm and grounded with that time by myself. It's a huge healing process for me. It doesn't have to be cerebral. When we heal, when we go out and we spend time in nature and we sit quietly, there's a natural frequency to the earth. The earth is a living organ. We're living on a living planet.
That's right. Yeah.
That's one of they keep pointing the telescope out there, and it's fascinating. But the reality is, there's no other planet like this planet, this jewel that we're living on. Look at Mars, look at the moon, look at Saturn, look at the pictures they're sending us. They're beautiful, but who wants to live there? There's no cedar trees, there's no butterflies, it is Eden. We are living in Eden, and it is us that is destroying the Eden that we live in. Culture and mythologies, basically cultures have shared mythologies, and those mythologies are supposed to be about sustaining life. And right now, we have a broken one because we're not sustaining life. We have one that it's based on our destructive will inevitably lead to human destruction. Without clean air and clean water, what people seem to think we owe the future an economy, but actually we owe the future life. We owe them clean air and clean water. So I think this idea of thinking in terms of, again, what's the lesson there is just like that simple idea of, and this is an ancient idea, that one should make decisions thinking about 7 generations into the future.
Yes.
That's what I mean about that quest for lost wisdom. I mean, maybe everything we need to know, we just forgotten. It's not like something new that we need to receive. It's actually something old that we need to remember.
We remember things, absolutely. So with the pieces that you are creating or have created on your journey, what do you want people to receive from those messages, from your documentaries, from your films, from your books, and capturing all that information? What is it you want them to take away from it?
Ultimately, my goal is to transform and to heal and to inspire. By sharing my truth and by sharing, I realize that we're really not that different. If I'm feeling like the world has stopped making sense because there's fish full of mercury and whales full of car parts, what's wrong here? Like, something's so wrong. And we keep talking about climate change, and we keep talking about the destruction of the environment, and every day there's another species that's going extinct. And yet nothing's really changing. The world just literally stopped making sense. And I think there's a lot of people that feel that way. Well, as far as what I want to share is that in sharing what I'm feeling and in my search, that maybe other people who are feeling the same thing, or you will find resonance with that.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to be that we used to read to know we're not alone. Now, in our world, it's also about we need to see to know we're not alone. So it's about connection. I'm a storyteller. That's what I do. That's my purpose, ultimately, is the storyteller. And it's an ancient profession. I'm inspired by ideas, and ideas for me are like seeds. And when the time is right, they grow. I'm not really interested, like I think it was Joseph Campbell that said, science sees the facts, the artist sees the story. And there's a difference.
Yes.
And I think facing a global ecological crisis, I go to understand the story. And I'm not saying the wisdom that I come forth with, the wisdom that I share, is not mine. I'm being taught it. It's not. This isn't about me and me as an individual having any specific answers to our problems. I'm sharing my process. I'm sharing my quest. Yeah. I'm sharing my pain. Yeah. And, I'm just sharing. Yeah. And looking for a more inclusive story, one that includes the diversity of the world that we live in, instead of just a bunch of white guys sitting around a boardroom table. It's like, let's bring the women, let's bring people of all cultures and nationalities to the discussion, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So there's need for a more inclusive story that includes everybody. Not just 2% of the world population.
Sure.
Yeah,
and it's often overlooked because we get so disconnected on an individual basis. So if we can't even really connect with ourselves, what's the likelihood to be able to connect with others on a more authentic and heartfelt way? I thank you for sharing and doing what you're doing, because it seems like a magical journey in experiencing the wild and the love of nature. Absolutely.
I read this quote by Ursula Le Guin. She recently died, but was a science fiction writer. This was actually from one of her essays, and it sort of speaks to, I guess, my intention too, which is, and these are her words: "Our roots are in the dark. The earth is our country. Why did we look up for blessing instead of around and down? What hope we have lies there, not in the sky full of orbiting spy eyes and weaponry, but in the earth we have looked down upon, not from above, but from below, not in the light that blinds, but in the dark that nourishes, where human beings grow human souls." For me, my raison d'etre and the things that I am most passionate about are the protection of this earth for future generations and for all the living things on it, the animals, the trees, the birds, the waters, and also for the spiritual equality of women, which is very much connected to our relationship to the earth. Mm-hmm. Those are the raison d'etre, I think, of who I am. Yeah. And then mixed with the joy of adventure. One of the great things about the adventure film format, it has a natural story arc to it, right? A beginning, yes, a middle, and an end. Yes. But it's not all serious, right? There are profound exchanges, which I share in the film, and then there are very humorous misadventures. I do believe that in the power of making people laugh, yes, and bringing them joy as a messenger, one of many who speak for the earth, like I said at the beginning, to find a graceful way of doing that. Yeah. And being a storyteller and using these genres gives me that opportunity.
Sure, absolutely. And that's such a beautiful quote that you expressed. I can see how that struck you and hinged itself to you to enhance your own purpose and intention of what you want to contribute to the world, and what does that look like for you. It's very powerful, very powerful. And yeah, it's quite a journey to be able to craft something out and really live with a serious intention and live with, I want to say, some sort of a legacy or insight and wisdom that can be shared, be it the next 7 generations or just within the time frame that we're in. So within that one moment even. Mm-hmm. It's very powerful.
Mm-hmm. I think both, yeah.
Very powerful.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What's next? Can I ask you this question? Yes, you had originally put out that it was 500 days in the wild, and you'd quoted earlier that it's almost 5 years in the wild, so to speak.
That's right.
So life will definitely take us on a journey longer, or maybe more lessons to learn throughout that time frame. What does the next leg of it look like for you to close out this entire chapter for you?
Well, in the physical realm, it's 4,000 kilometers of trails that are both land trails and water trails. The last thing I'll do is a 300-kilometer paddle on the Salish Sea into Victoria. The journey began in Newfoundland, and it connects 3 oceans. It goes 24,000 kilometers across the continent of North America, what used to be called Turtle Island before it was divided into countries. It connects the Atlantic, the Arctic, and the Pacific Ocean. So in the physical world, the last leg is I'm in Alberta. I'm in northern Alberta, and I'll be making my way south towards Edmonton, Calgary, and then eventually west into BC through the mountains of Banff and whatnot, and then out into the ocean. So that's what that looks like there. And for me, now it's about coming home.
Yes.
This is the final leg of the journey, so it's very much about coming home. I guess if you look at the journey, it's very yang. It's all about momentum, right? Moving forward. So what I look forward to at the end of this journey is the yin time, is the time to sit and for a few months reflect on what I've been through, look at my footage by myself, and just really reflect on the story, the message, the purpose. And then I'll go into a 9-month edit, finish the film, and begin to write the book. So because I'm an independent as an artist, if I'm on the road for 5 years making the film, there's another 2 or 3 years on the back end of once I'm done writing the book, making the film, like I said, it's more yin time, too, which I really, you need to find that balance between momentum and reflection.
Yes.
And I mean, part of the reason why the journey's taken me so long is because, like I said, how fast I did something became irrelevant, and how connected I was became what was the most important. How connected I was to the environment that I was in, sitting and being with places, as well as people that I would meet, not just like being in this rush all the time to keep moving, but to spend that week with the Ojibwe, or to spend days with Cree elders, or spend days with hunters that I meet out in the bush, and, whoever I meet on the journey, just to be present with them and to be present with myself, not to be fixated on something that's ahead of me, but just kind of being in the moment with it. But it has been very still, even with those reflective moments and even with that attitude. It's a very yang experience. Yes. Like it's, a lot of pushing to the limit thing. So what the future will look like will be to balance that with stopping, with in time, with reflection, and then begin the creative process of the edit and writing of the book. And then after that, then you have to release it. A lot of people that make films for people. It says directed by, but actually they've been paid for by channels or something like that. So once they completed the project, it's over for them. As an independent artist, it's not over for me when I'm like making the film. Is just part one. The only thing harder than making a film over 5 years out in the bush is releasing that film to the world as an independent. It's a long journey and a different journey, but also a very long journey. But another thing that I find very rewarding, because I'm not following anybody's book. It's also a very creative process, because it's all about ideas, about coming up with ideas of how to do things different. So there's an unlimited amount of potential there. And if you're not afraid of it, and you don't just focus on why something can't work, but instead you blow it right open and explore all kinds of possibilities. It's a very creative process, and a very exciting one too.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it does feel like in so many ways we have really come full circle. Even just in our conversation and even in what you're sharing, we've come full circle of the creative process of finding who you are as an essence as a 20-something-year-old, and then going on that journey and on that quest and seeking advice and introspecting and learning from others and connecting with others on different realms and different positions and circles and all these other challenges that you've faced. It brings you back to, okay, we've done one layer, so now we've done another layer and another layer, and it just one layer after the other hit the key points of what I keep hearing you say are elements of reconnecting to who you are from the heart space. So we have all these experiences, but we ultimately come to the heart. And I'm sure even this creative process that's going to happen in the next while for you, you're still ultimately going to come back to the heart and see what that looks like for you.
Absolutely, and for sure, to be guided by empathy and understanding.
Absolutely.
From that place, right?
Yep. Well, Dianne, thank you so much for sharing this journey. You've taken us on a beautiful journey ourselves just by sharing this story and these few questions of delving into learning more about you and what drives you and what really makes you passionate about being you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have a heart-to-heart conversation with another person. And I knew from the moment I met you, even though it was very brief, just from the light in your eyes and about your own soul journey, I also recognized in you a person who was driven to find her purpose and to help others and to create a world with more empathy and understanding. So I knew that as different as our paths might be, that we were actually on the same journey. I looked forward for a long time for this opportunity for you and I to be able to talk. Thank you. Yeah, it's always a great pleasure connecting that level, at that depth.
That was so beautiful. Thank you so much, Diana, for saying that. I really appreciate that, really. And you're right. I think that's why I chose to do the podcast series, to be able to find another way to capture the essence of what really makes people drive and passionate in what they do. So perhaps other people who are listening to this podcast can resonate or relate in a certain aspect of another element from their perspective of life. And if it's just a seed that's planted, or it's a big bulldozer that's been moved out of their way to look at life from a different lens, then so be it. But I guess that's my purpose and passion, to be able to share that with others. So thank you for being part of my journey.
Oh, thank you. And if anybody's interested, I do have a website. It's www.diannewhelan.com. It has all my films and books on it, as well as links to my social media accounts. So if there's anybody listening that would like to see more, hear more, share in the final year of the journey, that can all be found there.
Absolutely, and I will definitely share those details on the interview description as well, so everybody can connect with you and share those as well. So thank you so much once again, Diana.
Thank you. Have a great day.
I'm Naranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.